Hey guys, Tony here from Tectonic Byte, and I'm going to be doing a camera comparison between the OnePlus 5T and the Pixel 2. And I'm out here in the middle of the forest because I just decided to change things up a bit. The studio has been kind of boring, honestly, so I decided to come out here and do a camera comparison test. So for the camera specs of the OnePlus 5T, the main sensor has an f1.7 aperture and the focal length is about 27mm full frame equivalents, so you're going to get a pretty wide shot. And as for stabilization, it only has electronic image stabilization, which is kind of decent, but it's not as good as optical image stabilization. And for video, it records up to 4K at 30 frames per second. And as for the megapixel count, it has 16 megapixels. And as for the secondary sensor, it has only electronic image stabilization as well, and 20 megapixels, so you're going to get pretty crisp shots. As for the Pixel 2, it has an f1.7 aperture with electronic image stabilization along with optical image stabilization, so you're going to get pretty steady shots both in photos and videos, and it records up to 4K at 30 frames per second. For the megapixel count, it has 12 megapixels and dual pixel technology for fast autofocus. Okay, so for the first portion of the test, we're gonna start off with the rear camera, and this is just with the main camera because I don't want to cheat and like do digital zoom on the Pixel 2 and then supposedly optical zoom on the OnePlus 5T. So let's take some photos with the rear camera right now. So there's a nice flare that's going on. I'll take a picture of that. Okay, let's go right here, and I'll just take a picture of all the trees. And this way you can see a difference between all the color, saturation, and contrast. And then right here, I'll take another picture of the trees. I'll take a really wide shot of the trees right here. Okay, so now we're in a different spot, and I'll take some shots of these trees right here. Already I can tell that the OnePlus 5T is a little bit more saturated and it looks pretty unnatural. I'll take a picture of some rocks. And of these benches. Now we're going to compare the front cameras, and I'm not using portrait mode on either just to make it a little bit more fair. So I usually don't take selfies, but I kind of have to for this camera comparison. And already you can tell that the Pixel 2 has better skin tones, because on the OnePlus 5T I just look all purple for some reason. That's really weird. I'll take another selfie right here. And another one facing the sun. Okay, I think that's enough for the selfies because honestly it's kind of awkward and I don't really like taking selfies. So now I'm going to be comparing the portrait mode on the rear cameras. So let's go up close to these logs and test the bokeh effect. And already you can tell that the OnePlus 5T has a really weird blur, but we have to wait for the Pixel 2 to blur because it does it in post. Okay, so now let's take another one, but closer up. And just seeing first impressions, the Pixel 2 seems a bit more cropped in, and the OnePlus 5T seems a bit wider. And I think for portraits, you probably want a more cropped in shot, just so you get a shallower depth of field, and so it doesn't include all the weird background stuff. Okay, so now I'm going to be taking a picture of my cameraman Ken. Let's test the portrait mode or depth effect on this now, and let's see. Okay, so just looking at this, you can see that the face is noticeably sharper on the Pixel 2 because it has some post sharpening, and they both look pretty good, but I'll have to compare them even further later on. Okay, so now we're going to be comparing the front camera video on both of these phones, and let's see how they stack up against each other. When I compare these, I'm not going to be using the audio because honestly the audio is going to be really bad. So just comparing the stabilization and the crop of these cameras. And already you can tell that the Pixel 2 is a bit wider, and as for skin tones, the Pixel 2 looks a lot more natural, whereas the OnePlus 5T looks really weird. And just looking at this right now, I think the OnePlus 5T looks a little bit shakier, and that's just because it only has electronic image stabilization, right? Does it even have any stabilization?
Yeah, but the Pixel 2 doesn't have OIS either.
Oh. Well, I guess they're both not optically stabilized. Okay, so we're just testing this, and it looks pretty decent on both phones, but I'll have to give it to the Pixel 2 on this one. Now guys, we're going to be comparing the rear camera video of both of these phones at 1080p 60 frames per second, and I'll bump them both up to 4K at 30 frames per second later. So let's test out the stabilization and the sharpness, and let's just take a walk right here. And for first impressions, I have to say the Pixel 2 looks incredibly soft, and I'm not really sure why, but it looks like it's out of focus, but I'm pretty sure it's just really soft. And the OnePlus 5T's electronic image stabilization doesn't look like it's handling as well as the Pixel 2 with optical image stabilization and electronic image stabilization. They both look pretty good, but the OnePlus 5T has a little bit more shake. Okay guys, so now we're going to be comparing the 4K on both of the rear cameras, and let's see how they stack up against each other. Okay, so already the OnePlus 5T says that UHD video is only limited to 10 minutes, and I can see that the OnePlus 5T has a pretty big crop, and for some weird reason it looks really soft. Well, not really soft, it looks like softer than before, which is kind of weird. Or maybe it's just because it's compared to the Pixel 2, because now in 4K the Pixel 2 seems to be recording much sharper video than 1080p, which is much expected. But surprisingly, the OnePlus 5T's quality seems to have degraded, even though that makes no sense because 1080p is supposed to be less sharp than 4K. So like before, the stabilization hasn't really changed. The OnePlus 5T is a little bit shakier, and the Pixel 2 is doing a really good job with stabilizing the footage. Okay, so now we're going to be comparing the 4K footage on the rear cameras of both phones, but this time I'm going to be running, and I'm just going to start running right now. Okay guys, I just finished running back and forth with the video, and the OnePlus 5T with the electronic image stabilization looks really warped and messed up because it's trying so hard to compensate for the running, whereas the Pixel 2 is doing a pretty good job with optical image stabilization, but if you're running, you honestly can't expect much. Okay, so now we're going to be comparing the bokeh on both of these phones, and I'm just going to be using the main sensors because the OnePlus 5T is kind of cheating with the second camera. Okay, so for the first shots, I'm going to be doing a couple macro shots and just getting as close as possible to check the minimum focus distance as well. And let's check out the bokeh, or the background blur if you like to call it that. Okay, so we can zoom in pretty close with the OnePlus 5T, and let me take a picture with the Pixel 2 as well. Trying to get it in focus. Okay, let's take another one over here of these leaves. Trying to get it as close as possible. Okay, and let's take some pictures of these leaves. Okay, So for the majority of this test, I let you guys make your own thoughts, and I just showed you the comparison of it. But now I'm going to be sharing my concluding thoughts. And I have to say that for dynamic range, they both do a pretty good job at not overexposing some shots. As for saturation, the OnePlus 5T is generally more saturated and the colors pop a lot more. And that's kind of personal preference, but I kind of don't like it because it produces a sort of unnatural look. As for sharpness, I have to give it to the Pixel 2. It just generally looks a little bit sharper in both photos and videos. Even for some reason, the OnePlus 5T on the 4K footage, it just looked kind of soft, and that was kind of weird, especially because 4K should be sharper than 1080p. And as for stabilization, the Pixel 2 obviously does better because of the optical image stabilization, and it doesn't look as warped or messed up as the OnePlus 5T because the OnePlus 5T only has electronic image stabilization, so it warps everything. And especially you can see this when I was running, because on the OnePlus 5T it just looked all messed up, and then on the Pixel 2 it looked a little bit more natural and looked kind of stabilized. But honestly, I wouldn't run while recording because it still looks really weird. As for portrait mode, both are kind of a hit or miss because the Pixel 2 is all software based, so sometimes it will get like one half of the portion blurred out and then the other half not as blurred out. But if you try a couple times, the Pixel 2 actually does really well, and the sharpness is out of this world because it adds some post sharpness. And as for the portrait mode of the OnePlus 5T, the bokeh looks a lot more natural, and the blur is pretty nice as well, but the pictures are not very sharp and the face kind of gets pretty soft compared to the Pixel 2. So overall, the OnePlus 5T and the Pixel 2 both have very great cameras, both front and back cameras, and they produce pretty good video with stabilization and a nice bokeh as well. They also both have portrait mode, which also does well. So I'd recommend the OnePlus 5T if you want pictures that look nice and sharp, nice and saturated just straight out of the camera. You don't want to mess with it later. And also if you want that dual camera, which is somewhat handy at times, but honestly it kind of looks like it's digital zoom and not really optical zoom because the quality is comparable to the Pixel 2 digitally zoom. As for the winner of this camera comparison, I might be kind of biased, and maybe I am because my sister even calls me a Google goat. So I might be kind of biased because I used to be an Apple sheep and now I'm a Google goat. So I really like the Pixel 2, but I'll have to give it to the Pixel 2 because overall it's a lot sharper. The portrait mode looks more pleasing because the face is sharper, and the colors aren't as saturated as the OnePlus 5T, which is just my personal preference. And the stabilization is just really good, and overall the Pixel 2 camera is just out of this world. And I sometimes don't even want to take my camera out and just take pictures with my Pixel 2 because it does such a great job. So thank you all so much for watching this very long camera comparison. I hope you all enjoyed it, and if you guys like the outdoor setting and the new style of videos, tell me in the comments down below, and also tell me which camera you think was the best in the comments down below, and I'd like to hear what you guys think. Also, please leave a like and subscribe because it helps out the channel grow. Every new subscriber honestly brings a smile to my face because I get more motivated to make more videos for you guys. Boom.